It was nearly midnight when Johnny Cash pulled into the Desert Rose Motel, somewhere between Tucson and nowhere. The neon sign flickered, half the letters dark, the other half buzzing with tired electricity. Desert T.O.'s. The kind of place you stopped not because you wanted to, but because your body demanded it. Johnny's eyes burned from 10 hours of highway. The white lines had blurred together miles ago, hypnotic and endless. He'd left Phoenix after a radio interview that had run long, declined the hotel they'd offered, and decided to drive through the night toward California. But somewhere around mile marker 247, exhaustion had won. The motel sat alone against the desert darkness. A single-story strip of rooms, painted a color that might have been pink once, but had faded to something closer to bone. A few cars scattered in the lot, a vending machine glowing by the office, the kind of anonymous American roadside stop that had seen a million travelers and remembered none of them. Johnny parked his Ford under a stuttering streetlight and walked to the office. His boots crunched on gravel. The night was cool, desert air carrying the scent of sage and distance. Above him, stars spread across the sky in numbers you never saw in cities, thick as spilled salt, ancient as time itself. A bell chimed when he opened the office door. Inside, the air was stale and warm. Wood paneling on the walls, dark with age and cigarette smoke. A small television played in the corner, sound turned low, some late-night movie in black and white. Behind the desk sat a woman in her 70s, reading a paperback western by the light of a green-shaded lamp. She looked up slowly, marking her place with a finger. "Help you?" "Need a room for the night," Johnny said. She studied him for a moment, the black clothes, the tired face, the way he carried himself. If she recognized him, she didn't show it. She just nodded and reached for a registration card. $35. Checkout's at 11. Johnny filled out the card, paid cash, and took the key she slid across the desk. Room 7. She pointed down the row without looking up from her book. "Thank you," Johnny said. "Uh-huh." She'd already gone back to reading. Johnny walked back out into the night, found room 7 at the far end of the building. The key was attached to a diamond-shaped piece of plastic, the kind they'd been using in motels since the 1950s. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was what he expected. Small, clean enough. A double bed with a faded floral bedspread. A nightstand with a lamp and a Gideon Bible. A wooden chair in the corner. A bathroom with tiles that had been white once. The smell of old carpet and industrial cleaning solution. Anonymous. Temporary. A place designed for passing through, not staying. Johnny set his guitar case by the door and tossed his hat on the bed. His whole body ached, that particular tiredness that comes from too many miles and too little rest. He thought about taking a shower, but the bed looked more appealing. He sat down on the edge of the mattress, the springs creaking under his weight, ran his hands over his face, felt the stubble there, the lines that kept getting deeper. 53 years old and feeling every one of them tonight. That's when he saw it. On the wall opposite the bed, between two faded landscape paintings of the Grand Canyon, hung a black and white photograph, 8 by 10, in a simple frame. Johnny's eyes caught it almost by accident. A glance, then a double take, then a slow, deliberate stare. The photograph showed a man standing in front of this very motel. You could see the sign behind him, Desert Rose. All the letters still lit. The man wore dark clothes, dark pants, dark shirt. His hair was black, combed back. His face was lean, angular, serious. He stood with one hand in his pocket, looking at the camera with an expression that was neither smile nor frown, just present. Johnny stood up slowly and walked closer to the photograph. The man looked exactly like him. Not similar, not reminiscent. Exactly like him. The same bone structure, the same deep-set eyes, the same jawline, the same stance. Weight shifted slightly to one side, shoulders back. A posture Johnny recognized from 1,000 photographs of himself. He leaned in closer, his heart beating a little faster now. The photograph was old. The paper had that texture and grain you only got from film cameras decades ago. The edges were slightly yellowed, but the image was clear, sharp. Undeniable. This man, whoever he was, could have been Johnny's twin. Johnny reached up and carefully lifted the frame off its nail. turned it over. On the back, written in faded pencil, J.R. Cash, 1952. His breath caught. J.R. Cash. His birth name. The name he'd left behind when he became Johnny. John R. Cash, born in Arkansas. But everyone had called him J.R. until he'd walked into Sun Records, and Sam Phillips had told him he needed a proper first name. But this photograph was from 1952. Johnny would have been 20 years old then, just out of the Air Force, newly married, living in Memphis, and trying to figure out what came next. He'd never been to Arizona in 1952, never heard of the Desert Rose Motel, never stood in front of its sign for a photograph. Yet here it was. His name, his face, proof of something that couldn't have happened. Johnny sat back down on the bed, still holding the frame. He stared at the photograph, trying to make sense of it. A joke? Some kind of mistake? But who would make a joke like this? And how would they have known he'd stop at this particular motel tonight? No, there had to be another explanation. A rational one. Someone else named J.R. Cash. Someone who happened to look like him. It was possible. Cash wasn't an uncommon name. J.R. were common initials. And faces, well, everyone had a doppelganger somewhere, didn't they? People said that. Everyone has a twin walking around somewhere in the world. But this wasn't just similar. This was identical. Johnny set the frame carefully on the nightstand and walked back to the office. The old woman was still reading. She didn't look up when the bell chimed. "Excuse me," Johnny said. Still reading. "The photograph in room 7. The man in front of the motel. Do you know who that is?" Now she looked up, studied Johnny for a long moment. Something shifted in her expression. Recognition, maybe, or something else. She closed her book slowly. "That's Jimmy," she said quietly. Jimmy? James Robert Cash. Everyone called him Jimmy. She stood up, moving with the careful slowness of someone whose bones hurt. She came around the desk and looked at Johnny more carefully now. "Lord have mercy, you look just like him." Johnny's skin prickled. Who was he? The woman walked to a filing cabinet in the corner, opened a drawer, and pulled out a manila folder. She brought it back to the desk and opened it carefully, like she was handling something sacred. Inside were more photographs, newspaper clippings, a few letters. "Jimmy worked here," she said, "back in the 50s. My husband and I bought this place in 1950, and Jimmy was our first employee. Handyman mostly. Fixed things that broke, painted rooms, helped with guests when we needed it." She pulled out another photograph. Jimmy standing next to an old pickup truck, smiling slightly. He was a good man, quiet, kept to himself mostly, but reliable. You could count on Jimmy. Johnny looked at the photographs spread across the desk. In every one, the resemblance was undeniable. It wasn't just the face, it was everything. The way he stood, the way he held his shoulders, even the expression in his eyes. Something distant and thoughtful, like he was always listening to music no one else could hear. "Where was he from?" Johnny asked. "Arkansas originally. Same as you, I'm guessing by the accent." "Arkansas," Johnny repeated. "What part?" He said Dias, little farming colony up near the Mississippi. Johnny felt something cold move through his chest. Dias colony. That's where he'd grown up, where his family had moved during the Depression, where the government had given them land to farm, where he'd picked cotton and sung gospel songs and watched his brother die. "What was his full name again?" Johnny asked, though he already knew the answer. "James Robert Cash. J.R. for short." The woman looked at Johnny carefully. "You related to him?" I don't know. Maybe. My father had brothers who scattered during the Depression. Lost touch with some of them." It was true. Ray Cash had come from a large family, and the hard times had split them up, sent them in different directions. Johnny had never met most of his father's relatives. It was possible. It was possible there was a cousin, an uncle he'd never known about. "What happened to him?" Johnny asked quietly. The woman's expression softened with old sadness. "He died in 1953. Heart attack. Was only 25 years old. One day he was fixing the roof of room 3. Next day, he was gone. Doctor said it was probably something he'd been born with. Heart just gave out. 25. The same age Johnny had been when he'd recorded his first song at Sun Records. When his life had changed. When he'd stopped being JR and become Johnny Cash. We kept his photograph up, the woman continued. My husband and I, we never had children. Jimmy was like a son to us. So we framed that picture and put it in the room he used to stay in. Room 7. That was his room. Figured it was a way to remember him. Johnny looked at the photographs again. At Jimmy, James Robert Cash, who'd lived and worked and died at the Desert Rose Motel. Who'd been from Dyess, Arkansas. Who'd been 25 when his heart stopped. Who'd looked exactly like Johnny would have looked at that age. Did he have family? Johnny asked. Anyone we could ask about his background? The woman shook her head. He told us once his parents were dead. Said he didn't have anyone. That's why he was out here, I think. Just drifting. Looking for work. Looking for, I don't know, purpose maybe. Same as a lot of young men back then. She pulled out one more item from the folder. A small leather journal, worn and faded. This was his. We found it in his room after he passed. Never felt right to throw it away, but didn't know who to give it to either. She held it out to Johnny. He took it carefully, feeling the weight of it. The leather was soft with age, the pages yellowed. He opened it slowly. Inside, in careful handwriting, were entries, dates, thoughts, and scattered throughout, song lyrics. Verses and choruses, some crossed out, some circled, some incomplete. Johnny's hands trembled slightly as he read. Walk the line between the darkness and the light. Try to do what's good and true and right. But the shadows call and the road is long. And all I got to guide me is a half-remembered song. The words were raw, unpolished, but the feeling in them, Johnny knew that feeling. He'd written songs from that same place, that same longing. He turned more pages, found another entry. Saw a man today, broken by the world. Reminded me we're all just trying to get home. But what if home is just a place we made up to keep us walking? Johnny closed the journal carefully. His throat was tight. Can I? He had to clear his voice. Can I keep this? Just for tonight. I'll bring it back in the morning. The woman studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You take your time with it. I think maybe Jimmy would have wanted you to have it. Seeing as how you're, well, seeing as how you could be family. Thank you, Johnny managed. He walked back to room 7 in a daze, sat on the bed with the journal in his hands and read through the night. The entries spanned 2 years, 1951 to 1953. They told the story of a young man who'd left Arkansas with nothing but a worn-out truck and a head full of dreams. Who'd wanted to be a musician, but didn't know how. Who'd written songs in the margins of his days, between fixing leaky faucets and painting motel rooms. Who'd sent letters to radio stations that never wrote back. Who'd played guitar on his porch at night, singing to the desert stars because there was no one else to sing to. Johnny recognized every word, every feeling. It was like reading his own diary from a life he'd never lived. In the last entry, dated 3 days before Jimmy died, he'd written, "Sometimes I wonder what it would be like if I'd made it, if someone had heard my songs, if I'd stood on a stage somewhere and people had listened. But maybe that's not what matters. Maybe the singing itself is enough. Maybe we're not supposed to be heard by everyone. Maybe we just sing because we have to, because the songs won't let us be silent." Johnny closed the journal and sat in the dark for a long time. Outside, the desert night was infinite and quiet. Inside, he felt something breaking and mending at the same time. He thought about his own life, about the success he'd found, about the stages and the crowds and the records that had gone gold, about how easily it could have gone differently, how close he'd come so many times to being Jimmy instead of Johnny, just another dreamer who never got heard, just another name written in pencil on the back of a forgotten photograph. But Jimmy had written those songs anyway, had sung them to the empty desert, had lived his brief life with purpose and meaning, even though the world never knew his name. That mattered. That had to matter. At dawn, Johnny walked back to the office. The old woman was making coffee, the smell filling the small space. "Morning," she said. "Morning." Johnny set the journal carefully on the desk. "Thank you for letting me read this. Find what you were looking for?" Johnny thought about that. "I don't know, but I found something." The woman poured 2 cups of coffee without asking, handed one to Johnny. They stood there in the quiet morning, drinking in silence. "You know," Johnny said finally, "I'd like to record one of his songs. If that's all right with you, give him a chance to be heard." The woman's eyes filled with tears. She nodded, unable to speak. Johnny finished his coffee, set the cup down gently. "Can I buy that photograph? The one in the room?" "No," she said. Then, seeing his expression, she smiled. "But you can have it." Jimmy would have liked that, knowing his picture was going somewhere with family. Johnny drove away from the Desert Rose Motel as the sun climbed over the desert, painting everything gold and rose and endless. In the passenger seat sat the framed photograph of Jimmy Cash, James Robert Cash, Jr., the man who could have been Johnny's twin, or his cousin, or just another dreamer who'd happened to share his name and face and Arkansas roots. Johnny never did find out for certain if they were related, but it didn't matter. They were connected by something deeper than blood, by the songs they'd both needed to sing, by the dreams they'd both carried, by the long American roads they'd both traveled in their different ways. And 6 months later, Johnny walked into a studio and recorded a song from Jimmy's journal. He didn't change much, just polished the rough edges, found the right melody. He called it The Desert Singer. It was never a hit, never played much on the radio, but people who heard it said there was something different about that song, something raw and true, like it came from someplace deep and honest, like it had been waiting a long time to be sung. Johnny never told anyone the full story, never explained where the song came from, but sometimes, late at night, when he was alone with his guitar, he'd think about Jimmy, about the young man who'd sung to the desert stars, who'd written his songs and lived his life and died at 25, unknown and unheard. And Johnny would sing those songs again, quiet and true, and feel like he was keeping a promise, like he was finishing something that had started long before he was born, like he was proving that every song matters, every voice counts, even if the world never knows your name. The photograph hung in Johnny's home studio for the rest of his life. Visitors would sometimes ask about it, and Johnny would just say, "That's family." And it was. In all the ways that mattered, it was.